running behind, so.
It's great talking.
Is Stephanie here? No?
I was wondering, well, he's setting up, or maybe after his presentation, I would love it if we had a group photo, and if anybody wouldn't mind, like, just we take 5 minutes, we line everybody up there, like, everybody who's got a camera, we'll make sure you're in it, and I'll have a sign-up list if you want me to email you a group photo. How about that? All right, after this talk, it's been a nice group.
I would love that as well.
Great.
Hello everybody. My work is on psychoanalysis. I'm a psychoanalyst, Jungian one, and I've been working in clinical practice for 20 years. And it happened to me one day that I got really something interesting. I mentioned the word promiscuity. Is this promiscuous? I asked my patient, and I realized it's a very powerful word. So I realized there is much more to promiscuity than sex. It has many different dimensions, and it took me on a journey. I've written a Jungian book on promiscuity, which I'm going to tell you about as well, because it's a psychoanalytic thesis. And once this was written, I ventured upon psychological research, which is now being presented today. Some first results, it's a very comprehensive survey. I come from Slovenia, which is Central Europe. If you travel from Venice to Vienna, the shortest way would be through Slovenia. It used to be a communist country, ex-Yugoslavia. It's 2 million people, and we managed to escape war, but we were many years we were on the verge, because we border Croatia and further is Bosnia and Serbia. It has some resemblance with Canada. We have more than 60% of forest, and we surely bear some similarities. Not only the bears, but also people are probably alike. Yeah. So how does this work?
Oh, press enter.
It's just, okay. Yeah, no. How do you go up?
Well, how'd you go back?
Yeah.
Backspace.
Backspace.
Should be on
Okay, so it's enter. So traditionally there was a spiritual dimension of sexuality, and it is well documented, for example, in alchemy. And I really want you to think about this in a spiritual way, because it was a tradition in which alchemy, as a Western spirituality, used sexual act as something very powerful and deep, as a symbol of something coming together. And then suddenly we had the age of modernity, coming with Sigmund Freud. He's the father of psychoanalysis, and he came out with a very modern perception of sexuality. Sexuality is repressed, basically, according to Freud. So with psychoanalysis, the repressed contents get analyzed and integrated into consciousness. And then we have Carl Jung's tradition. He stopped talking about sexuality as a sexual act and saw it in a more symbolic sense again. And then in the postmodern time in which we are now, it's very obvious sexuality has got many functions, and we are in need of a postmodern definition of sexuality. We could say each human has her or his own sexuality. This is one of the famous alchemical engravings, the text Rosarium Philosophorum. And you can see it's the sun and the moon coming together. It's not just men and women. So it's about the opposites. It's about conscious and the unconscious. It's about light and dark. male and female, female and male in any forms. Unfortunately, this was not acceptable by Facebook. It was considered a porn. So when I gave a public lecture in Ljubljana last week, I wanted to publish and pay a little bit of money to get published. It was denied. So there are some functions of sexuality we don't usually think about. Of course, it's propagation of the species. But it's also very creative. If you want to live sexuality, you have to be creative. It just doesn't come when you want. It actually comes when you don't want. And it's communication. And it's also overcoming cultural differences. You know, there are so many pairs coming from different cultures. And I was surprised how we talked about Diana in the morning. I don't know if you were here. It was an excellent talk. So there are many people coming together, bridging cultures through being pairs and through living sexuality, being examples of bridging these gaps. And it's also working on one's own self-esteem, experience. It's also the body emotional dimension. And then we have promiscuity as something very powerful. Jungians, you would say there is an archetypally numinous experience people report in promiscuity. But how do we define promiscuity? There is some definition in the web, for example, in the Webster dictionary. We have indiscriminate mingling, so it can be anybody, or a brief or random social or sexual exchange or relation. So there is one element of the non-choosiness, indiscriminateness of the sexual partner, and then we have the briefness of sexual encounter. So I think this is really the essence of sexual promiscuity. It is anonymous. So this was the psychoanalytic thesis of promiscuity as an attempt to fill up the inner void, to feel empty. We want to fill up this emptiness. We either eat compulsively or go shopping, but we also have sexual encounters. This is what people do. And what gave me to think about promiscuity initially, you know, as Jungians, we are obsessed with classical myths and stories, and in Old Greek, we find two promiscuous stories, two big fathers who were promiscuous. You know, promiscuity in classical era was allowed to gods, but not to people. So it was the domain of the gods. Of course, people did it, but it had a special place. So it was like Jupiterian, which was the Zeus, which was more emotionally stable, warm, open, honest, so to speak, bisexual, even legalized. You know, in classical tradition, you have Zeus, that he was legal, he had so many children. And then you have the hidden part, the negative part, which is cold, lustful, manipulative, secret, unrevealed, non-empathic, cruel and coarse, which is summed up in the myth of Kronos, who went after the nymph, you know, and he got her in secrecy, and out of this Chiron was born. So he got wounded. He had this incurable wound. And then what I thought about Oedipus, that's the essence of my psychoanalytic thesis, is that Oedipus didn't know his mother, yet when they met, they felt this compulsion to have sex, and they didn't know each other. So they had sex, of course. They were king and queen. He was the redeemer in the Thebes. But through having sex, they got to know each other. And finally, they realized they are mother and son, and this is where they stopped doing this. So this gave me thought, this is where promiscuity and incest come together. So this could be some deeper dimension of promiscuity. And now the main thing I want to present today is the psychological survey on promiscuity. This is quantitative, statistical, scientific research. 120 men, 390 women, aged from 18 to 75. from the general public of Slovenia. I had to translate some of the questionnaires, and these are the 3 existing questions from the socio-sexuality inventory. And I also added 2 other questions. So these 2 questions relate to the most promiscuous year of one's life. So how many partners beside the actual partnership, and how many were there on one occasion. And then the other 3 are the last 12 months, how many partners, and how many different partners were for one and only occasion during the whole life, and how many different partners have had sexual intercourse without having an interest in a long-term committed relationship. It turned out this Kronbach alpha was very good, so I could use out of the pilot research, I could use these 5 questions as a measure of promiscuity, factored to these questions in the factor analysis. And then the personality, how do we measure personality to get some correlations and predictors? So we use the big 5 dimensions questionnaire. Then we also use the gender attributes questionnaire, the dark triad, that's narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellism, which is manipulativeness. We use the existing socio-sexuality inventory, which is all together. It is sexual behavior, it is sexual fantasies, and it is sexual attitudes. We also measured libido with different questionnaires and values, with a list scale of values, and we also measured physical attractiveness as self-reported. So these are some numbers on promiscuity found. We look at the median. So men had, in the year when they were most sexually active, they had on average, 3 partners out of apart from their existing relationship. Women had 2. Of them, there was one partner for one occasion, and women as well 1. A number of partners during the last 12 months was men 2, women 2. How many different partners do you have sexual intercourse with on one and only one occasion during your life? There were 2, and women 2. With how many partners was there sexual intercourse without having an interest in a long-term relationship? 2 and 2. So are men indeed more promiscuous than women? You know, in some cultures you have this prejudice. Well, this research, which was done in Slovenia for now, shows there isn't